It started with a few dozen, then 100, 1,000. When I wrote my article about Gibraltar last week, it was already in the news. People swimming in masses around the breakwater in Ceuta. I mentioned the story in passing because I was writing about that area anyway, and I figured the whole thing would go away. Nobody ever talks about Ceuta. But by the next day, the number of migrants crossing Spain's southern border with Morocco was in the tens of thousands. Suddenly it was the only story. Mobs of young men roamed the streets, shops were closed in fear of looting. The locals were terrified to leave their houses. In the following days, the number increased. By Friday, the papers were saying 60,000 had invaded Ceuta. By Monday, the number was up to 70,000 arrivals out of 100,000 attempts. At some point, the military was called in, and they managed to push most of the new arrivals back across the border. Today, some shops have opened, and only about 5,000 migrants remain in the tiny Spanish enclave, mostly young men waiting to apply for asylum. Ceuta and Melilla, two tiny Spanish enclaves on the north coast of Africa, don't get a lot of press, but today they're the center of the debate on immigration. Incidentally, I've been to Ceuta. In my first year living in Spain, I figured I would make a trip to Africa. I just wanted to do some continent hopping, and Africa was right there. So I took a bus to Algeciras in Andalusia, caught the ferry across to Ceuta, and walked to the border with Morocco. There I caught a taxi for Chefchaouen, where I spent a few days being unimpressed with Moroccan cuisine. The white and sky blue buildings were nice, though, and the city was full of hippies. One of the prominent local industries seemed to be selling hashish to those hippies. Other than that, I don't remember much. It was more than 20 years ago. But the trip did open my eyes to the fact that there's a big difference culturally and demographically between North Africa and Sub-Saharan Africa. African politics and geography wasn't a big subject at my high school out in the Arizona desert. Sue me. So it's been an interesting week here in Spain, and things are far from normal down in Ceuta, which has a permanent population of about 84,000. What happened exactly? We may never know for sure, but it started with a decision by the Spanish Supreme Court, which said that illegal migrants could only be immediately turned back if they were caught crossing a physical barrier, such as a border fence. This was just their very specific interpretation of Spain's immigration law, which is what Supreme Courts do. But the result was that if migrants turned up on a beach, they weren't considered to be crossing a physical barrier. So suddenly, the government was expected to process them as asylum seekers. Word got around, and tens of thousands of people started arriving on the shores of Ceuta. Allegedly, this was helped along by viral videos and TikTok profiles suggesting that Spain is letting everyone in. Come quick. Fair enough. Pedro Sanchez and his panoply of boobs pushed through the regularization of over 1 million illegal immigrants just this spring. So I guess people wanting to live in Spain can be forgiven for thinking they'll be legalized once they're here. Whether or not the Moroccan government knew about this beforehand or actively encouraged it is an open question. Both newspapers I read these days have been calling the whole thing an example of hybrid warfare. And it's certainly a massive failure of Pedro Sanchez's government to do their very basic job of securing the border against invasion. Hey everybody, it's Daniel. Welcome back to Spain to Go, the best podcast in the entire multiverse for all things Spain. Here's a podcast I never wanted to make, but we're doing it anyway. Ceuta and the recent border crisis. It looks like things are largely back to normal now. I mean, at least normal compared to 3 days ago. This story has been all over the international news. It's usually not a good thing when Spain is suddenly the top story internationally. Anyway, this is episode 152, and it is about Ceuta's immigration emergency. Quick shout out to Jim, aka Seamus, who recently sent some money to support the podcast. Thank you, Jim, or Seamus if you prefer. Seamus is actually a multi-donor and he comments on almost all my YouTube videos as well. I appreciate the support. If you would like to support this podcast, head on over to expatmadrid.com/donate. expatmadrid.com/donate is the donation page. And there, you can send some money to help me make more episodes of this podcast. I try to do about one every week, and your support makes it much more agreeable to do so. Seamus's message this time was diaper money, brother. As I've mentioned in the last few episodes, I am soon going to be a father, and I've been asking for your support in the form of diaper money. So, if you would like to support this podcast, once again, the page is expatmadrid.com/donate. I appreciate it. Back to the topic of Spain's immigration emergency, let's talk about Spain and the Schengen zone. Because, of course, the Spanish border with Africa is Europe's border, too. I don't know if this is common knowledge in the US, but most European countries offer visa-free, borderless travel between themselves under a treaty called the Schengen Agreement. The Schengen Agreement was first signed in 1985, and it means that there is no real border control between Spain and France, or France and Germany, for example. You can take a bus across Europe without getting your passport stamped, or just walk across the French border in a town like Puigcerdà here in Catalonia. You should still take your passport when flying, but it'll only be checked by the airlines, not the police. As a result of the open borders policy, Spain's failure to police its external border becomes everyone's problem, because anyone who arrives in Spain can then travel visa-free around most of Europe. Who knows where they'll end up? Because of the current immigration emergency, Italy has temporarily suspended Schengen Agreement protections for arrivals from Spain. Other countries have threatened to follow suit. Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez, who, as I have made clear elsewhere, I don't like at all, called them all selfish and then decided to publish a playlist of his favorite songs for summer 2026, right in the middle of the historical migrant crisis. I'm recording this on Tuesday, August 4th, 2026. Let's talk about where we stand now, because as I said earlier, the Spanish military was successful in pushing many of the migrants back across the border to Morocco. Since most of the shops had closed to avoid looting, a lot of people were having trouble finding food and water in Ceuta. Having nothing to eat, they just left. But the immigration center in Ceuta is still overwhelmed by people refusing to leave peacefully. According to my very limited knowledge of these things, migrants under age 18 are allowed to stay until they can be processed as asylum seekers. But the whole thing is complicated by the fact that many people arrive without documents, and Spanish authorities don't know where they're from or how old they really are. Meanwhile, around 100 swimmers died in their attempt to reach Spain. A makeshift morgue was created to help identify the bodies. Out on the Mediterranean, a sea barrier has been set up past the breakwater to make crossing more difficult, and to please the Supreme Court, who wanted a physical obstacle at the border. In theory, there are police controls between Ceuta and mainland Spain, also Melilla and mainland Spain, so getting to one of the Spanish enclaves doesn't give people an easy way into the rest of Europe. On the other hand, in theory, the border with Morocco was supposed to be under control, and 70,000 people got across anyway. Spanish Interior Minister Fernando Grande Marlaska says that Morocco is an absolutely trustworthy ally and not a threat to Spanish sovereignty in any way. I don't think anyone is stupid enough to believe it. Let's briefly revisit the 2021 border crisis, because in reality, this is not the first time this has happened. In 2021, Morocco did exactly the same thing in response to Spain's occasional support of Western Sahara. More on that in a minute. That summer, 5 years ago, about 8,000 people crossed the Ceuta border in the space of a few days. It looked like the Morocco side border guards all went on break at the same time, and masses of people rushed the fence. It was shocking to see the videos, but that was only a fraction of the size of the current invasion. For me, the takeaway from that event and this one is that Morocco can do this anytime they want, and that Pedro Sanchez's government is unwilling or unable to stop them. And of course, all this has to do with the long history between Spain, Morocco, and Western Sahara. Spain has a long relationship with Morocco, just 8 miles or 13 kilometers apart on the Straits of Gibraltar. The two countries have had plenty of problems throughout the centuries. Not to get all historical here, but the Moorish conquest was a Muslim invasion starting in 711 AD and coming from what is now Morocco. The subsequent reconquest is Spain's national origin story, which ended in 1492 with a unified Spain ready to explore the world. The African enclaves didn't happen yesterday either. Spain has had Melilla since 1497 and Ceuta since 1580, though it was previously Portuguese from way back in 1415. Morocco as an independent state has only existed since 1956. However, the Spanish maintained the forgotten colony of Western Sahara until 1975. So, what's the deal with Western Sahara? This is a topic I never thought I would write about. As the name suggests, there's not much going on down in Western Sahara, an area of desert flatlands populated by fewer than 1 million Berbers. The Western Sahara territory has been claimed by Morocco for decades. Spain pulled out of their colony just days before the death of dictator Francisco Franco in 1975, and afterwards remained largely neutral on the question of Western Sahara's independence from Morocco. In 2021, the Spanish government allowed the leader of the largely unrecognized Sahrawi Republic to go to a hospital in La Rioja to be treated for COVID. In retaliation, Morocco let 8,000 people across the Ceuta border. That's the 2021 border crisis I talked about a minute ago. In 2022, perhaps as a result of those events, Spain changed its mind on Western Sahara, and now the official position is that Morocco holds sovereignty. Over in the US, President Donald Trump agrees. He recently congratulated Moroccan King Mohammed VI on his wise leadership and declared the Western Sahara dispute a thing of the past. For now, and as usual, everyone is just playing the blame game. Some people on the Spanish left still support Western Sahara's independence. You might see the Berber flag at protests, for example. And Spain gets about 30% of its natural gas from Algeria through a pipeline across the Mediterranean Sea. Morocco and Algeria are diplomatic enemies for several reasons, one of which is Western Sahara. Recently, Pedro Sanchez visited Algeria, and last week the papers were suggesting that the attack at the border could be a reprisal for that visit from an angry Moroccan government. Down south of the border, the Moroccan interior minister claims that actually Morocco was helping Spain the whole time, and blames the whole thing on mafias and social networks. Pedro Sanchez, for his part, is claiming that controlling the border is something that all 27 European countries need to take responsibility for. That's his usual way of saying that nothing is his fault. So far, according to El Español, the only person who has lost their job over the whole thing is the funcionaria who released the data saying that 49,900 people had already crossed the Ceuta border last Friday. She was fired, effective immediately. The elephant in the room is that for every large public failure of the Spanish left, the right-wing parties rise a little bit further. Up here in Barcelona, the whole Ceuta problem seems far away. But Morena and I live in a neighborhood with a large Muslim population, and I think there are plenty of legitimate reasons to be concerned about Spain's southern border. As a former immigrant myself, I'm not against immigration, but I think it's clear to everyone that we need to step up controls and make sure we get the right kind of immigrants moving forward. Among the 70,000 who stormed the border, authorities identified known jihadists and members of Morocco's intelligence agencies. Pedro Sanchez and his government are clinging to the idea that unchecked mass migration leads to slight economic growth, and that may have worked for a while. But as the rise of far-right parties here in Spain and elsewhere in Europe suggests, a lot of people are now questioning that narrative. Sanchez is in power for another few months at least. Whether our next prime minister will be much better on the topic of immigration is anyone's guess. That's about all I've got for today. I hope you are having a great day wherever you are in the world. In my article on the rise of the far right here in Spain, I talked about how the corruption in Sanchez's party contributes to that. But another thing was a story from last summer in which a few young Moroccans were arrested and quickly released after beating up a Spanish abuelo and filming it for viral TikTok content. That was down in Torre Pacheco, Murcia, and things got quite tense in the aftermath. You can listen to episode 116 for more about that. Like I said, it starts with the political corruption issue, but ends with the race riots in Torre Pacheco, which thankfully did not last long. Back when I was a rebellious teenager, we used to say, "The revolution will not be televised." But I guess the next European war will probably be fought by 30-second video clip in order to placate the algorithm's need for viral content. People will go to their deaths in exchange for a few thousand likes. I wish I were joking. I'm not. On that less than optimistic note, I would like to encourage you to subscribe to this podcast. Most of the time, we do not talk about topics that are this heavy. But this has been a big story internationally for the last 2 days, and I wanted to make sure I talked about it. So please like this episode, subscribe to the podcast, leave me a comment wherever you're listening. I'm on all the major podcast platforms. You can also check this out on the YouTube channel, Learn Spanish with Daniel. I teach Spanish over there. No big surprises. I've got more than 100 videos at this point, and I will be making more soon. So, Learn Spanish with Daniel is the name of the YouTube channel. Thanks once again to Jim, also known as Seamus, for his support. If you would like to support this podcast, please head on over to expatmadrid.com/donate. expatmadrid.com/donate is the donation page. You can send me diaper money, any amount from €10 on up to however much you want is greatly appreciated. You could also subscribe to this blog on Substack. Substack is a blogging platform that's popular these days. I'm doing my writing on there, at least for now. Go to spaintogo.substack.com for that. spaintogo.substack.com. You can become a subscriber over there as well. Thank you once again for listening from beautiful, hot, and sweaty Barcelona. Have a great day and hasta la próxima. Bye.